Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Constitution Center. It is wonderful to see all of you hungry for historical and constitutional knowledge. I am Jeffrey Rosen, the president of this wonderful institution, which, as those of you who've been here before know, is the only institution in America chartered by Congress to increase awareness and understanding of the Constitution among the American people. There we go. We have such an exciting series of programs that are coming up, and those of you who are not members must sign up so that you can come see them. In the next few months, we have Michael Beschloss, Kenneth Starr. In Washington, D.C., that was an appreciative, a bit of applause there. We're on the news at every moment here. We're doing a wonderful collaboration with The Atlantic. Its new special issue on the future of democracy is done with the National Constitution Center, and we'll have events in Washington on October 2nd and here on November 28th, and then a series of federal judges on Bill of Rights Day to discuss the future of the Constitution. So sign up and become members. I also have to just share with you how excited we are that our online interactive Constitution, which brings together the leading liberal and conservative scholars to discuss every clause of the Constitution, has just been adopted by the College Board, which will require all advanced placement students to study it before they graduate from high school.
Yay!
It is such a thrill. It's such a great learning opportunity, and I want each of you to download the app, interactiveconstitution.org, and learn from this great document. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that all of you are here means that you share with me my excitement that our guest tonight has honored us by coming to the National Constitution Center. She is one of America's greatest public historians who's done more to increase awareness and understanding of the Constitution and American history than almost anyone else of our time. I became passionate about history, I think, as a high school kid, reading LBJ and the American Dream, and then read and reread and read again books like No Ordinary Time, Team of Rivals, and of course the Bully Pulpit. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the great Doris Kearns Goodwin. I've been so looking forward to the conversation. It's such an honor to meet you. I want to just begin with that moment in the LBJ book that I remember as a high school kid where he's left the White House, you're at the ranch, you get up at 5:30 every morning and get dressed. He comes into your bedroom and gets in your bed because he's cold and afraid, and he wants to talk about what it was like to be president. And what was that experience like, and how did that convince you to become a presidential historian?
Whoa, what a great beginning. Well, let me go backward first for a minute before he's in the bed, which is that, so what happened is, I was a 24-year-old graduate student at Harvard and was selected as a White House Fellow, this fabulous program that still exists today. And we had a big dance at the White House the night we were selected. He did dance with me, not that peculiar. There are only 3 women out of the 16 White House Fellows. But as he twirled me around the floor, he whispered that he wanted me to be assigned directly to him in the White House. But it was not to be that simple, for in the months leading up to my selection, like many young people, I'd been active in the anti-Vietnam War movement and had written an article against him with a friend of mine, which we'd sent into the New Republic, and they hadn't said anything. But suddenly, 2 days after the dance in the White House, it appears with the title, How to Remove Lyndon Johnson from Power. So I was certain he would kick me out of the program. But instead, surprisingly, he said, bring her down here for a year, and if I can't win her over, no one can. So I did eventually end up working for him in the White House and then accompanying him to his ranch to help him on his memoirs the last years of his life. I'm not sure I ever fully understood why he'd chosen me to spend so many hours with. I like to believe it was because I was a good listener, and he was a great storyteller. Fabulous, colorful stories. There was a problem with these stories. I later discovered that half of them weren't true, but they were great. But I also worried that part of it was that I was then a young woman, and he had somewhat of a minor league womanizing reputation, so I was constantly chattering to him about my steady boyfriends, even when I had no boyfriends. Everything was fine until one day he said he wanted to discuss our relationship, which sounded ominous when he took me nearby to the lake, conveniently called Lake Lyndon Baines Johnson. Wine, cheese, red check tablecloth, all the romantic trappings. And he started out, Doris, more than any other woman I've ever known, and my heart sank. And then he said, "You remind me of my mother." So it was pretty embarrassing. So anyway, I worked for him that last year in the White House, went to the ranch, and he was so sad those last years at the ranch. He knew that the war in Vietnam had cut his legacy in two. So he'd wake up early in the morning. I would stay at the ranch with him and his wife, and he would wake up and he just couldn't go back to sleep. And he would be cold, as you say, so he would come in. I knew he would be coming in, so I would get up and sit in the chair, and he just needed to talk. He needed to talk about what he had hoped he would be remembered for civil rights, for the Great Society, for everything else he did, Medicare, Medicaid, aid to education, immigration reform, extraordinary higher, lower education, PBS, NPR, but he knew that his legacy had been cut in two, and that sadness just meant he had to talk about it. And that's how we talked in the early morning hours. Not quite as sexy as it sounds. I was in a robe.
In the book, you say that he was frustrated by the fact that Lincoln's biographers couldn't bring Lincoln to life, but you say that he was inspired by FDR, as FDR was inspired by Theodore Roosevelt, as Theodore Roosevelt was inspired by Lincoln, and Lincoln by Washington. To what degree did Johnson learn from his predecessors lessons of presidential leadership?
Yeah, you'd really hope that the presidents would look to their previous presidents not to compete against them, not to feel they have to undo what they've done in the past, but rather to be able to learn from the best parts, even from the triumphs and the tragedies of the previous presidents. No question that FDR, he called him his political daddy. When Johnson first went into public life, it was as a young congressman during the New Deal. And FDR actually met him when he was a young congressman, and he was so impressed with Johnson's energy. He said, "Do you know, if I hadn't gone to Harvard," he said, "that's the kind of young dude almost, the bronco that I would have been if I had not gone to Harvard and had that elitism." He predicted that maybe someday he might be the first Southern president. So he saw that way back in 1937. Sadly, you know, you wish he had learned from Eisenhower or from Truman or from FDR himself about the importance of talking to the public when a war is going on and sharing with them the fate and the fortunes of that war. And that's what he could have learned. But they're a small club. It's 45 people. They should learn from each other, like we learned from our parents and grandparents.
You have the amazing scene where FDR is trying to be lobbied by Johnson to give money for a non-profitable dam, and Johnson just gets his attention by telling stories.
Yeah, it's amazing. So he wanted the hill country where he lived. They didn't have enough people per mile to be able to get the federal money to have electricity, brought rural electricity into the area. So the first time he went in to see FDR had a way when he didn't want to do something of just talking. So he started talking to him about, did you know that naked Russian women look different from American women? And poor LBJ doesn't know what to do, and before you know it, the time is up. So he then asked somebody, what should I do the next time I go in? They said, bring maps, bring charts. He likes to see things. So he brings in these charts, and then he says to him, look, let me tell you what those women and it's like his mother, in that area have to do. And he talks about them having to wash things by hand, the men having to go out at night, and there's no milk machine because there's no electricity. And he's so impressive that FDR says, okay, let me see what I can do. So he calls the head of the Rural Electrification Company. He says, I've got Lyndon Johnson here. I know he's been turned down. They don't have enough people per mile. So FDR says, look, I know those people down there. They breed really quickly. They'll have enough people. So he gives Johnson the loan. Johnson walks out of there. He said it was the happiest day of his life. And he brings electricity to the hill country.
Great. Here's a thought experiment. You're the young Doris Kearns then, and you're advising LBJ about the lessons of his hero FDR, and he's in the middle of the Vietnam War, and you now know all these lessons about FDR and his conduct in the war. How would you distill them for Johnson, and how could they be useful for him?
Well, I think part of the problem was that he didn't feel confident about his understanding of world affairs. He thought he could extrapolate from his experience with the Congress, where if he would meet with Ho Chi Minh, he could persuade him that somehow he could have a Mekong River television, TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, and that would make him want to end the war. And FDR would understand, I think, to him that you're fighting ideology, as he was in World War II. You're fighting nationalism. You're fighting much larger issues, and there may not be, in this instance, a compromise. I think Johnson thought, which was a good thing he thought in domestic affairs, that you could somehow get people to bargain with something, but maybe you can't. And obviously, there was no way that FDR could bargain with Hitler or with Mussolini. And I think he would have told him that you have to understand that. And maybe this is not a war that needs to be fought. What are you doing in trying to change people's feelings about nationalism in Vietnam? But most importantly, as I suggested, I think what he would say to him is, if you're going to go into this war, you have to go into it and educate the American people, because the citizens are going to be sending their sons and daughters into battle, and there's nothing more important than understanding why they're there. Johnson so wanted to keep the Great Society going that he didn't want to talk about the war. He hid the appropriations. He didn't have the National Guard come out. And he just thought, maybe I can run these two things together. And then what he was afraid of was not so much even winning the war. He was afraid of losing the war. So he kept putting more troops in to prevent the loss of the war, instead of having a philosophy of whether is this war worth winning or not. But it lost him his presidency. It lost him his place in history. And he was, as I say, he suffered from that as well. So that even though I was so angry with him when I first knew about him, when I was in the war, being with him just made me feel more empathetic toward somebody who I believe this isn't what he wanted. When I used to yell, "How many kids did you kill today, LBJ, hey, hey?" That's not what it was about. And I came to feel sad about him, and sad about the heartbreak of the country, that this guy could have been, and was in many ways, an FDR, except for this failure of leadership epic in the war.
One last question on LBJ.